Forsvar av det liberale demokratiet mot autoritære krefter viktig for Humanitisk Forbund. Vi hører mye om USA, men hvilken rolle skal Europa ha når det gjelder å forsvare det liberale demokratiet mot Russland, Kina og ulike diktatorspirer som Viktor Orbán og Donald Trump? Den 19. januar 2025 arrangerte Humanitisk Forbund Øverland-foredraget for 3. gang. Vi hadde invitert Guy Verhofstadt til å snakke om det her. Han tidligere statsminister i Belgia og har vært medlem i EU-parlamentet over mange år. Her foredraget hans, vi håper du lytter og kanskje lærer litt også. God fornøyelse.
So, thank you very much. First of all, I'm very pleased for the invitation. Otherwise, I had to go tomorrow to Washington D.C. So I think I made a better choice. So thank you very much for the invitation to give this lecture, and I think it's an enormous honor to speak in Oslo, the lecture for Øverland, because in Øverland comes together two tendencies that, or philosophies that I share a lot. Humanism, first of all. I was a long time a member of the Humanist Association in Belgium, but I have to confess you that I didn't pay my contribution the last years. And secondly, his European commitment as the founder of the European movement, and I'm actually the chair of the European Movement International, the network that has been created in 1948-49, and that is still the basis for the European integration movement that started after the Second World War. So I think that in Øverland comes together two philosophies, two big tendencies that are crucial for our continent. That's humanism at the one hand and European conviction at the other hand. So the title of my lecture is Europe in a New Age of Empires. That's the way I call the world that emerged since 2008 after the start of the financial crisis, marking a sharp difference and division with the world that in which I was born, because I'm born in 1953. So that is in the beginning of the Cold War, a period that some of us remember as a period of a Cold War between two systems, the United States and the Soviet Union, followed by a second period in history, what I call the twin between liberal democracy and free market economy after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989, and a period that was described by Francis Fukuyama, that I know personally, so I have already discussed it many times with him. He described it as the end of history, you remember. And since he has written that book, history has really not ended, but go in a higher gear, I would say, between 1989 and 2008. And we entered in 2008, after the financial crisis, in what I call a new age of empires. And what I mean with that, a new age of empires, is a brutal competition between empires. And empires for me are big countries with a continental reach and with the ambition to dominate that continent and, if possible, even the whole world. And that there are empires like China, like the United States, but that can also be India. That can be also Russia, who has the aspiration and the ambition to become again an empire. That can be maybe Brazil in South America and the Americas and other countries in the world. And what I want to discuss with you is what are the risks, the challenges of this new world order. It's not that we are entering in this new world order. Like I said, we entered in this new world order already since the financial crisis of 2008. Not only the financial crisis, also the fact that at that moment, you remember that there was the invasion of Russia in Georgia. So the invasion of Russia in Georgia was the return of Russia, of a brutal Russian empire on the world stage. So together with the financial crisis, economically and politically, I think it's obvious that 2008 marks the start of a new period in history. And what I want to discuss with you is what the risks are. And then in the second part, the more depressive part, so is what role Europe can play in that new world order. But first, the risks. I think there are three main risks, three main challenges with the new world order in which we have entered in 2008. First of all, an obvious geopolitical risk. Secondly, what I call a regulatory economic risk, with deglobalization as the outcome of it. And thirdly, and most importantly, also for ourselves, a political democratic risk in that new world order. And first of all, the geopolitical risk, what we already witnessed now, this new geopolitical world will be a brutal world, a violent period in history. We already witnessed it with the brutal invasion of Russia into Ukraine. We see everything what is happening in the Middle East. It's in fact a very unstable world, mainly characterized by three elements. The first is it's a competition, a power for power between empires, not nations. There are still, I don't discuss it, more or less 200 nations in the world, but what will happen is it will be a competition between empires, and nations will try to find security, guarantees, safeguards under the umbrella of one of these empires. That will be the world of tomorrow. That happened already in the last years. We saw that with, for example, Sweden and Finland becoming member of the NATO. If I was invited here 3 years ago, for example, and I would have predicted that Sweden and Finland will become member of NATO, you would have said, he has drunk too much yesterday evening. What is true, we drank too much yesterday evening. But this time, effectively, Sweden is in NATO. And that was unthinkable. If we talked about that with Swedish politicians a few years ago, they said no. And certainly not with Finnish politicians who are still waiting for the help we would have given in the 30s. And they are still waiting for that help of the allies. So that was unthinkable. Today, with the invasion in this new world of empires, they are entering. And the same will happen with Ukraine. The same will happen with Moldavia. The same will happen with Georgia. Maybe not in NATO, but in the European Union. And even what we see a few days ago, the leader of Armenia said, a historical, traditional ally of Russia said, no, we want security, and security may be better inside the European Union. That could be an option for them. And the second element, it will not only be a brutal competition between empires, but it will be a brutal competition between empires who don't have the same values. It's not like the age of empires of the 19th century in Europe. You remember that? The European empires that we got, who had more or less the same ideas, the same values at that moment. And that was a peaceful century of more or less 100 years of concert of Europe, a balance of power between these empires. No, this time they all defend different values. It are not all liberal democracies, these empires. It's state capitalism in China, it's crony authoritarianism in Russia. It's liberal democracy, let's hope that it continues, in the United States of America. It's more or less what I call electoral autocracy in India. It's difficult to say for the moment. The outcome of the Indian elections were in any way not going into a wrong direction. It was a serious experience. It's the biggest democracy in the world. So empires have not the same set of values, what create tensions naturally between them. They have not the same view on how a society must be organized. And the third element of it, it's not only empires and not nations who compete with each other, and nations searching for security under the umbrella of an empire, and not only a different set of values between these empires, but it's a competition on everything. It's not only military, it's not only economically, it's also technologically, it's also a competition on Earth, it's a competition in space, it's a competition on very sophisticated products. I'm a lawyer, I don't understand anything about it. Semiconductors is the name. It's not only a competition on that, but also on raw materials, for example. So it's a competition on every aspect of life, on every type of it. That is the geopolitical risk. It will be, it was already for the last more or less 15 years, and it will be certainly for the next decades also a brutal world. A world of competition on every aspect of life and on every aspect of society. And the second thing is it will be, risk is naturally a regulatory economic risk, which is mainly the consequence of the rift we will see between the two empires who aspire in any way world domination. That's the United States, as we know, and at the same time China. And this rift between both the US and China is already happening. It's also not new. It's also not a question of who is in charge in Washington, D.C., in the US. It can be the Democrats. It can be the Republicans. One may be a little bit harsher than the other, but give, for example, the battle on telecom and blocking Huawei. It has been done also with the help of a democratic administration, the semiconductor industry, the agreement that the Biden administration made with the Dutch government to forbid ASML, that's the biggest producer of semiconductor machines in the world, was nearly a monopoly on this. So they made an agreement to forbid export of these highly sophisticated production machines to China. The whole rift for the moment, a discussion about TikTok and ByteDance, where it is a work together between Capitol Hill and the White House, between Republicans and Democrats. So only now they are hesitating because only now they discovered that 65% of the capital of TikTok and ByteDance is foreign capital, mainly American capital. But that's only now that they are discovering this. And so that's the reason why Trump tries now to put it on ice or in the fridge, like you want, for 90 days. But also Europe is participating in that rift and that fight by creating a number of regulations. One of them, AI, for example, is trying to create an AI environment, artificial intelligence, on our own terms. Not on the terms of America or China, on our own terms. And the consequence of all this, of this rift, US, China, or regulations will be two things: deglobalization. First of all, a deglobalization trend will be as big as the deglobalization we have seen between the two world wars. A deglobalization that is now accelerating beyond what happened during COVID-19. And you know what happened during COVID-19? The outcome was every economic powerhouse in the world said, we need to have independent supply chains. We cannot return to the pre-COVID-19 world. So we need to create our own supply side chain independence or alliances with other countries. So, and that is a trend of deglobalization, if you want it or not. And the second trend, even more, and the second consequence, even more important, will be the creation and the establishment, that's already happening in reality, of a two or even multiple tier technological order. There will not be one system technological system in the world, there will be different competing models, one to each other. At least 3 competing models. The private-owned American order, the state-controlled Chinese order, and then the right rule-based European order. And some optimists are saying in big books, calling these models digital empires, that finally everything will go well. The rule-based order, the right-based order, will prevail. I'm not so sure of that. When I see what is happening the last days and the last weeks, even already before the return of Trump in the White House, where, for example, Facebook, Zuckerberg announced that neither fact-checking, neither content moderation will be part of the model in the coming years. Certainly not in the US. So instead of the US, what many have predicted, will copy the European model, I'm not sure that it will happen. I think that the American model with the return of Trump will simply continue on the predominance of the First Amendment and so on and so on. And certainly, it's not clear that the rule-based European model will finally prevail worldwide. And certainly, what will happen is there will be a competition between these models. Everything privately owned, market-orientated data in the hands of Musk, Zuckerberg, and you name them. A state-controlled system where the Communist Party of China is in fact controlling everything, with the inclusion of data, and then a rule-based model, DSA, DMA, IA, GDPR, and so that are all the files that we have approved the last who have certainly, I voted in favor of them, so in the European Parliament, but we have one big problem, and we will come back to this, I will show you the slide. It doesn't create any industrial technology in Europe. So right-based approach is very fine, but you have to be aware that it's not with a right-based approach that we create a European Facebook or a European X or a European whatever digital feature. So that's the regulatory economic risk. Like between the 2 world wars, it will be a period of deglobalization. So in a sense, it's completely the opposite of what happened in the 19th century. In the 19th century, you got empires, got the same values, was a period of globalization. Now we go in a new age of empires. That's the reason why there is the word new, naturally. And it will be empires with different values and a period of deglobalization, as we have seen between the 2 world wars. And then I come to the 3rd risk, and the main challenge, certainly for an Øverland lecture, I would say, no, that's too early. You can, no, far too early. Thank you. Because everybody will look to the figures and not listen to me anymore, so that's not the purpose. I come to that in a moment. I will do a sign like this, and then you can do it. But the 3rd risk is the democratic political risk, and that is what we are facing for the moment. That's the crisis of liberal democracy and the rise of populism. And in fact, the rise of populism in our high-income democracies is a little bit, not accurate, because it's there. The thesis of politics today is populism. The thesis of our societies today is not liberal democracy, it's populism. Maybe the antithesis will be a new form of liberal democracy. We will talk about that in a few moments. But the election year of 2024 has showed the establishment in most of the elections. We had the elections in India. We had the American elections, obvious. People are pointing to the UK to say, yeah, but it's different there. It's in fact not different there. If you look to the actual opinion polls and you put the Conservative Party together with the Reform Party of my esteemed former colleague, Mr. Farage, together they have 50% of the public opinion. They are polling at 25% both for the moment. So the question that we have to ask ourselves, because populism is not new. You could say, as a politician, I can say that, you can think that, but I can say that. Yeah, in fact, in a certain way, populism is inherent to politics. Because we work with elections. So if you have elections, you have to please a part of the electorate. So you need to be a little bit populist as a politician, otherwise it will not work, because you need the votes of people. So there is populism and politics are very intertwined and linked to each other, but it's different from the past. We got always populist parties and populist politicians. And in the past, it was called in France Poujade, le Poujadisme. The Monsieur Poujade was another name for the same, in fact. So the question that we ask ourselves, what is different now? How populism that exists already for decades, even before the world, have always existed, even in ancient Greece it existed. The question is, what happened? How a breakthrough was possible? Because a breakthrough is there. America and Trump is not longer believing in liberalism or liberal democracy. So, certainly also what we see in most of our own countries in Europe, we see a breakthrough. In the Netherlands, for example, it's a right populist government in place. There was already in Hungary for a long time, of my old friend Viktor Orban. Already in Poland, there is Slovakia, but Italy, what is Italy for the moment with Mr. Salvini in the actual government? So the question is that I want to raise with you, what happened now that makes that populism is mainstream, a liberal democracy is not longer seen by big parts of the population and the electorate as the normal way of organizing a society. And what I want to go through with you are three things that are, in my opinion, coming together and are making that possible. That's first of all the polycrisis in which we live. Secondly, the role of social media in it. And third, the absence of democratic leadership in our societies. The first, the polycrisis. I think the reason why we have always a crisis, if it is not a financial crisis, then it is a migration crisis. It's not a migration crisis. It's a geopolitical crisis, a war like in Ukraine. But what is different from the past is it's a polycrisis. There are different crises coming together and different sources of discontent. It's not one element of discontent in public opinion. It's at least three elements of discontent. There is migration in many communities. Certainly more a fear than a reality, but it's a source of discontent. People doesn't like, even when they are not confronted themselves physically. It's even more a problem in these communities where people are not confronted with migrants, more than in these communities where they are confronted with migrants. But it's a first element of discontent. The second element of discontent is the inequality that we see in our societies. The inequality today is as big as in the Gilded Age, in between 1870 and the start of the First World War. The three big egos in American tech, Bezos, Zuckerberg, and Musk, together have a portfolio of wealth that is as big as the wealth of the bottom half of the US population. Now, can you imagine? Three people, their wealth is exactly the same as the bottom 50% of the American population today. There are other ways to describe that and other ways, but I think that makes it clear what the problem is. And so this inequality is pushed forward by an economy like typically the American economy, but also ours, that is now a real big tech economy based on a few monopolies, and at the same time we become also a political oligarchy as we see today. And for the first time, Biden has written all the books that already have been published on that. It's already 20 years that there are books written on that problem of the big tech companies who create an oligarchy because the Supreme Court has given the free right to companies to fund American politics. So that's the way it works. And that goes together with an explosion of the financial sector, with a very historical low productivity that we are facing, and at the same time, a further mass transformation of the more secure, typical industrial jobs towards low-paid platform workers, certainly in the US. So the industrial economy becoming a platform economy and creating lower wages for these people who are there and less secure. That's the inequality. So you have to invite me back in a few years, only to talk about that maybe. But it's a huge issue. And a second, you have migration, you have this inequality, because this inequality, there is a third element that I want to add to that, is the oppressive health and climate policies that we are following in our countries, who create reaction, who create resistance by a lot of lower middle and middle class people against the elite, saying, yeah, we have to pay for what? For your policies. So if you put it together, migration, the inequality, the oppressive health and climate policies, it creates what we call now a feeling of declinism, I call it. So people are thinking, look, it goes all wrong. And my children will have it, will not have the same future as I got, not the same wealth as I got. They will have a far more difficult life than we have. And that's declinism. When decline, the idea of decline is coming into a community and common society, then there is a loss of hope. There is no longer direction. People don't see anymore a direction. And for politics, that's crucial, because politics is about giving direction, showing a direction, and giving to the people not only the sentiment, but the certainty that if I follow that political line, it will go better in the future, so that there is hope for a better future. That doesn't exist anymore because of this polycrisis. We can manage one crisis, one after the other, but now we have them all three together at the same moment. And that is second element, fueled by our social media, and who in fact are strengthening that feeling of a polycrisis. You know about the social media. I will be short. We all thought, it's the rescue of democracy. Look what is happening in the Arab Spring. And that was the case in the midst of 2014, 2015. Today, we all believe that it's killing democracy. So we changed our opinion about rescue of democracy to killing democracy. And we all know how it works. Algorithms are not made for spreading democracy. They are made for making profit. So to make profit, you have to show more of the same, so that you can do more likes, more clicks, and that gives more profits. So algorithms are working very well in a free market economy to sell I don't know what, even maybe the membership of the Humanist Association. But it doesn't work well to spread democracy, because in democracy you see different opinions next to each other, and to have an interaction of these different opinions on television, on a Sunday morning, in a television program, or whatever. But that is not what algorithms are doing. Algorithms are creating echo chambers, as we call it. That means there is not one public opinion anymore. In non-country, what you have is layers of opinion. And you are member of the humanist layer of opinion. But there are others who are not, and who have never heard about the humanist layer of opinion. And there is not an interaction within this layer of opinion and other layers of opinions. That's the echo chambers. And you are inside such an echo chamber because you have said, I'm interested in this, and you will get this for weeks and months. And at the end, your world only consists of that first click that you have made. Well, not your first click, but the first clicks that you have made, and the follow-up afterwards. That's the second thing. So we have a polycrisis. We have, everybody's on social media for the moment. I think what are the worldwide figures are 68% or something like that are now on internet of the worldwide population. So in our countries, it's more than 85, 90, and so on. So is the virtual world that we have created around us. And then we have the last element to explain this democratic political risk, a huge absence of what I call democratic political leadership. Or centrist politics has all become pragmatism, practical features. So we have a problem, let's try to solve it. The screw, okay, it's solved. But there is in fact no vision. There is in fact no direction, like I already explained. Also no hope. So more than that, we have killed in the last 20 years every ideology. Ideologies that doesn't... we talk no longer about ideologies. In a certain way, you can say, that's a bold statement, what I'm going to do now, that the third way of Tony Blair and the neue Mitte from Schröder leaded to populism today. By what? By killing the left-right divide. By saying ideology is not important. It's all about flexibility, liberalization. I'm in favor, I'm a neoliberal, a liberal in a broader sense. So for me, flexibility, liberalization. But when a socialist is saying it's only about liberalization and that, there is a problem because there is no longer a difference between left and right. There is no longer a fight for ideology. There is no longer an ideology that can show you the way. Ideologies are useful things. They can be awful. They can lead to the Cultural Revolution of Mao. They can lead to the Grand Terror of Stalin, at the one hand. But at the other hand, an ideology is important because it creates direction in a political debate. It creates a vision for the future. You believe in it or you don't believe in it. But when it is absent, politics become what? Pragmatism, practical solutions, and it becomes empty. So we have created, by a lack of democratic leadership, an enormous vacuum, a balloon, a political balloon, empty, that fills itself with populism, because populism doesn't work on creating hope, creating a future, creating a vision. It's about anger. It's about fear. It's about discontent. So populism doesn't work on ideology or I need to project a future or a vision that people can follow. No, they are working on, in fact, more discontent, more fear, more anger that supports their movement. And if this balloon, this political balloon of society is empty of ideology and of centrist politicians to say something about that, to show vision, to show direction, what's happening? It fills itself with everything what is anger, discontent, and populism in society. So for me, the political democratic risk is the consequence of these three elements: a polycrisis fueled by social media and certainly not helped because of the absence of what I call political leadership and the possibility of centrist political leadership to show vision, direction, and create hope for the future. So ultimately, to resume myself now on this first part of my intervention is, the new world order will be an existential fight. An existential fight between those still believing in democracy and those believing that autocracy is the best way forward. I was shocked. I looked to my English friend there, as I read in The Guardian a few days ago that the young people between 18 and 44 years, 44, that's not the young people, okay, but I'm 71, so it's very young. Between 18 and 44, that 1 in 4, nearly 1 in 5, 1 in 4 of these young people believe that an autocratic leader is better than democracy. In Britain, in the oldest parliamentary democracy of the world, who invented, I would say, parliamentary democracy. So it will be, if you want it or not, a fight between autocracy at the one hand, and at the same time democracy. And what I would suggest before talking about Europe is that we can win the battle if we do 4 things. Only 4, so it's not a lot, I would say. The first is that we need to try to develop new, what I call geopolitical strategies. You have to unite all democracies in that fight. You cannot win a war when half of your democracies are outside your club. Or, even worse, are invited by the club of the autocracies. What is happening today? I think it's a huge failure to organize G7 summits as we do it. Because a G7 summit is a humiliation for every other democracy in the world. Be it Brazil, be it South Africa, be it India, what all democracies. No, we keep our G7 meetings, the Western world. So we are humiliating, by doing that, in fact, all other democracies in the world. More than that, we make it possible that they are invited and present in a BRIC meeting where they are liaising with, in fact, autocracies like China, like Russia, and like Iran and other pundits in the world. So the first thing to do is, if you want to beat autocracy, you have to be sure that all the friends are in the same club. No, it's like the Humanist Society Association, I would say. You have to do that. That means, for example, that the G7, skip it, abolish it, and make a democratic alliance. Secondly, that means that the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, sorry, but there is nothing North Atlantic anymore about the North Atlantic Treaty Organization challenges. When Biden comes to Brussels, to the NATO headquarters that we have, he's talking more about, in the past, now more before the war with Russia, he was talking more about China. In my opinion, China is not North Atlantic. In my opinion, it's in the Pacific, somewhere in Asia, and not in the North Atlantic. So that means that NATO, created at the end of the 40s as what I call an alliance of nations, has to become an alliance of democratic pillars, and that can be Southeast Asia, with Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea as a pillar, North America with the US and Canada. Well, Canada can enter in the US, we have heard in the meanwhile, and a European pillar. That is the new configuration that we need. And not to say, oh, it's NATO, and NATO will then have a few independent agreements with this country. So the first thing to do is new geopolitical strategy, in which we say we need to stop, in fact, with our Western colonial thinking from we, the West, and we know it, and we have a G7 to do it, and NATO, North Atlantic. We need to make it alliances that are broader, that in fact are covering the whole world. The second thing to do is we need to reform capitalism and to break the tech oligarchy. And the only way that I see to do is to break up them. And we have the possibility to do that. We have the possibility to do that based on our competition rules that we have in the European Union. Because we are not brave. I know that many people say, yeah, we are putting fines on their companies. Fines on these companies. When you put 5 billion, in the meanwhile that you have put a fine of 5 billion on Meta or other, their stock market value have doubled. So what it means, such a fine? No, you have to do what, in fact, happened also in the American economy in the beginning of the 20th century. You have to break them up, and we have to find, I will not go into detail for that, but you can invite me later on once, to find a solution for the division between capital and labor in a capitalist economy. How you do it? Because that is the center, the center problem, the cause. Also, Marxist critics, everything turns around the division between labor and capital. What you do about that in a modern economy. The third is we have to rethink liberal democracy. So on liberal democracy, we first of all have to define it, what it is. I like the most always the definition given by Lincoln in the Gettysburg Address in, I think that was 1863, during the Civil War, when he said it's a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. That's the definition of Lincoln about democracy. And I think that today, representative democracy as such doesn't fulfill the promise anymore. It's seen by a huge part of the population as elitists, as an elite running, not as people running the country, even when you have elected your people. And moreover, I think we need what I call a binary democracy, while you have representation and at the same time direct participation of citizens. Technologically, we have now everything in place to do that. That was not possible in the 18th century at the moment of the French and the American Revolution. That was maybe not possible in the 19th century when most of these parliamentary democracies were created. But it's possible today. There is technologically no limit anymore to give the possibility to every citizen the possibility to decide. You can say, yeah, but he's not willing to do that. No problem. He can choose his representative. He's willing to do that because he doesn't like the elite. He wants to do his own stuff, his own decision. It's possible today. And there is an example of that. Switzerland, for example, for 150 years. That's a long period, huh? 150 years. For 150 years is a binary democracy based on representation and based on direct participation. Not direct participation in the way we organize it. We organize it in Norway the same way as we in Belgium. Oh, we're going to do once a referendum. That's not participatory democracy, because a referendum once in 4 years or in 10 years, or like in the US, in California, it's every 2 years. It's a divisive experience, naturally, what you do. You say to the people, divide yourself now. Who is your enemy? That is what you do with the referendum. And my British friend is sitting there, so he knows what I'm talking about when I'm talking about holding one-time referendum. In Switzerland, it's completely different. It's daily practice. It's every 2-3 months that they receive not 1, 10, 20 questions, practical questions even to answer. So it doesn't become a divisive experience in society, because once you're with your neighbor, once you have a different opinion from your neighbor, and it becomes a part of, I am a citizen. And a citizen is more than every 4 years going to elect a representative in parliament. I know that's a difficult thing also for politicians to recognize. I have chaired the Conference on the Future of Europe with 800 randomly selected citizens in the European Union before my colleagues in the European Parliament accepted such an exercise. We are the representatives of the people. Like, people cannot represent themselves. The best representatives of the people seems to me the people. But okay, not in the opinion of many politicians. So it's not a question of, is it participatory democracy, is it representative democracy, but the fact that we need to go into a direction, certainly with the technological features we have today, into a binary system is absolutely crucial if you want to counter populism. Give the people themselves a role in it, instead of electing one or other lunatic. The fourth and last element of the battle we need to do is to create a new environment for the internet and for the social media. All the stuff that we see today is crap. Community notes, content moderation, fact-checking. All these things are invented to keep the power of these private tech companies on themselves. Content moderation, we do that themselves. It was crazy. I'm pleased, in fact, with the position of Zuckerberg, that he says now that he's going to skip it. That makes the things clear. It was a scandal that a few thousands of fact-checkers are sitting there in India and are looking to all your screens and saying, this is allowed, this is not allowed. No, against the... But with community notes, it's the same. If you're violating a community rule, you can be skipped on X. Or the same is happening. So what we have to do is to do a radical thing, besides breaking them up, where we can do it in Europe, that is to skip one element in the law in America, and the same exists in European law. That is what we call Section 230 of the Communication Decency Act. What is Section 230 of the Communication Decency Act? It's a very simple thing. It makes that platforms are not responsible for the content they publish. They are not. So what you have to do is you make them responsible for the content they publish. The only thing what you need to do. It's the whole tech community in Silicon Valley who pushed for that principle. That same principle has been applied in DSA, DMA, still in all legislation in Europe. And the only way to solve the problem, you make them like a newspaper, like a television station, like whatever, responsible for the content. And then courts can do their thing, can limit what is necessary. Free speech has not to be interpreted by neither Zuckerberg, neither Trump. It's a court who has to do that. That's the rule of law. That's the division of labor in a real democracy. So abolishing and reinstating responsibility for the content you publish is the basic solution to, in fact, limit and create a new environment on internet and on the social media. And then I come to my third part of my intervention. After we have all done this and we have won the battle against the autocracies, and we have, again, social media who can fuel democracy instead of countering it, Europe in this new world, where we are, where we stand. So today, my answer to that question, are we ready for that new world? No, we are not ready for that new world. We are absolutely not ready for a new world, a new age of empires. I will give you the three reasons and then a fourth institutional to show you that. The first is we are military not ready. We are completely depending on another empire, on the US and on the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, because nevertheless, now you can do it. Nevertheless, it's not that we don't spend money on military. What I have to you, no, he doesn't want to do it. What I have to show to you, I will already introduce it, are simply not what you normally find on internet. Normally you find on internet what every country is spending on military. What Norway is spending, what France is spending, what Germany is spending, and so on and so on. What I have done is to put them in a continents. What are the Europeans spending? What are the Americans spending? It worked a few moments ago, so I don't see what is happening now. Otherwise, I have you describe your balloons. I'm not so good in that. Not so good. Oh, he didn't. Yeah, thank you. So, it are a little bit of old figures. They are from 22, and in the meanwhile, all figures are going up. So what we have done here is 22, putting them in balloons. The Chinese, Indians, the US, the EU. For the EU, I'm always taking for once the UK inside, so to make my case still. And that's also normal. So I want to talk about what is Europe doing. Europe, it's EU and UK and Norway and so on. So what are we doing? So we are spending roughly, that's 22. It's now higher than that, $320 billion on military expenditures. That is higher than the official figure of China. Probably the real figure of China is higher than the official figure of China. And we're spending 3 times more than Russia. Even today, Russia today is 100 billion since in 23-24. So we spend more than 3 times what the Russians are spending. I don't think that you have the impression that we do that. At the same time, this 320 is more or less 40%, 35-40% of what the Americans are spending. This 870, I think, it's now more than 900 at the beginning of this new administration. So, but we are roughly spending 35%, nearly 40% of the Americans. And we can only do, that's not on the chart, 10% of the operations of the American army. So, I'm a lawyer. I don't know nothing about figures as a lawyer. Nevertheless, I was Minister of Budget when I was young. I'm always saying to be Minister of Budget is not necessary to know anything about figures. You need to know only the word no. That's the only thing what you need to know as Minister of Budget. But nevertheless, even I, as a lawyer, I know when you spend 35% and so on of the Americans, you can only do 10% of the American army, you're 3 to 4 times less effective than them. The reason is very simple. Duplication, duplication, duplication. We have in Europe together more than 130 weapon systems. Americans have 25 weapon systems, the Chinese 25, the Russians more or less 30 weapon systems. We 130 weapon system. We duplicate everything in Europe. We have an inflation of cooperation, that's true. We cooperate with everybody. We, the Belgians, with the Dutch, on the Navy, then for historical reasons, the Germans and the French in Strasbourg. We have cooperation between Italy and France. We have a cooperation in the Nordic countries on military, but that's not a European defense. That are all that. So the question is that we can secure our security, we can guarantee our security if we would have a European Defence Union. Is a European Defence Union against NATO? Absolutely not. The initial idea of NATO, approved by the American Senate in 1949, was that NATO would not be an alliance of countries, but an alliance of pillars with the European Defence Union of 6 countries in the center of it. That was approved in 1953, until in the French National Assembly in 1954, they voted against. So it's quite cynical that now the French are in the front run to have a European defense. Why it was? Because it was a project of the predecessor of the French Prime Minister at the time, Pierre Mendès France. So he didn't engage a confidence vote in that vote. That's the way it works in politics. If you don't engage a confidence vote, you will not pass the vote. Because, it's a free right. You can do what you want. You can follow your opinion, your conscience in politics at that moment. So what happened was that Stalin was dead, the French had invented their own atomic bomb. They said, not necessary anymore now. And what we did was creating NATO again and allowing Germany to enter NATO. The first European Defence Community that was nearly approved at the few 10 votes in the French National Assembly was a cooperation of 6 countries with 43 divisions, more than 800,000 soldiers, 2,000 airplanes, 12,000 tanks. No drones at that moment. So it was a powerhouse that would have been created with the approval of the American Senate, as the European pillar of an international order and a military order. My prediction was that if we succeeded at that moment, there was maybe no war in Ukraine today. Because at the frontier, at the border of Russia, there will be a real political and military power. What is not the case today. Now we are completely lost if we don't have the help of our American friends. That's the reality. So I know that everybody is talking, certainly also in Norwegian politics, I presume. We have to increase the 2%. It has to be 3, 4. Wow, the sky is the limit. I can tell you, you can do that for me. I'm not against it. I'm mostly in favor of it, but it will solve nothing. Nothing at all. The only thing what it will do is more waste, more duplication. And the only way to do it is to create a European defense community the fastest as possible. There becomes a day that can already maybe within a few weeks, where there is financially blackmailing the Americans. Trump is doing that towards Europe and saying, if you don't do this, we go out. If you don't do this, we disengage. If you don't do that, we stop with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Then we are completely lost on our own. In the meanwhile, people thinking now are saying, but first of all, you need to create a European industry, and then we create... No, that's not the way it works. You create first the European Defence Union, and then comes out a European industry. 80% of what we buy in Europe, 80% of what we buy comes from outside the European. And some people are thinking, if we build together ammunition, then we create European man. No, it's not that way. That's the consequence of the European Defence Union, not the origin of European Defence Union. So first thing to do is that. That's not giving up NATO. On the contrary, it's strengthening NATO, because then this 330 billion will be used in a totally different way, with the capacity to defend ourselves against Russia if there is aggression. What we don't have. We have the capacity, we have the money, but we have not the capacity to do so. I have other files to show you the number of soldiers. We are worldwide champions in the number of soldiers in military, but that's for not that. The second thing to do is we need to become really a technical digital powerhouse and develop our own devices the fastest possible. Why? That's my next slide that I want to show you. This is a very depressive thing. This is, in 2020, the stock market value of the big tech companies in the world. With the red is America, the blue is China, and if you have your glasses, because otherwise you don't find Europe. So you need your glasses. That's that yellow-orange thing there. There is one thing that I have to wear you. This is 2020. So the next time when I come, I will show you a more actual one, because there is one missing there. Now there is ASML in the yellow box, because they grew so importantly. It's not only SAP as the big. SAP is a German, you know that, a German accountancy firm selling accountancy programs to small and medium companies. I said that once in the room when there was a guy from SAP. He was not pleased with it. Came later and said, no, we do many other things. I said, yeah, okay, sorry, but it's mainly an accountancy, selling accountancy programs. Now, what is the problem? How is this possible? A good example of why that is happening is a disaster. You agree with me? And why is it possible? It's possible, and I will create you know it better than I do, one example that is S there, and Spotify. Spotify, there are many people, not in Norway, you are intelligent, but outside Norway, who think that's an American company. It's not an American company, it's a Swedish company. But as a Swedish company, we need to go to New York and to America to develop itself, because they were not capable to roll it out in Europe. And then they came back from America to roll it out further in Europe. The reason why is that in Europe, if you have somebody had a fantastic idea and he wants to launch a new device feature on smartphones and mobile phones, in Europe, you need 27 authorizations to start, to roll it out everywhere in the single market. 27. In America, it's one. It's FCC, Federal Communication Commission. One authorization, check, poof, you can start. In Europe, you need to have deals with more than 100 telecom companies before you can roll out, because we have no consolidated telecom market. Because all ministers of finance don't want a consolidated telecom market. They like it more, the income for themselves, national income for the national treasury. And spectrum is national authorities, not while in America, you have a deal with 3 mobile operators, you cover whole the US. Or in China, you have a deal with 4 mobile operators and you cover all of China. In Europe, not. And that is explaining why Spotify went, first of all, to the US to develop everything, and then came back and rolled out also the streaming services in Europe. And there is an S. But it explains why we have this problem. So we have a single market, yes. You're a member of the single market. You're an active member of the single market. Only the single market is about what? I know 5 minutes, but I will do my best. I am a politician. So a single market for what? I'm always joking. Yesterday evening also, we have a single market for chocolate. Very good, Belgian chocolate. Beer, also good for us. Champagne, everything. Well, we have no single market for everything, but it's the future. For digital, no single market. For telecom, no single market. For capital services, the money to invest, to make it possible, no single market. So the second thing to do is, if we really want, we have to do more than only approve GDPR, DSA, DMA, AI. You don't create with these regulations an industry. You can only create an industry in Europe when you make one regulator, one single market, one telecom business in Europe. It works like that. It works in America like that, it works in China like that, and we think, oh, we have a few rights, we will compete. You will compete nothing at all with the Americans and the Chinese. And so that brings me to my third thing, that is that economically, we need to change course also in our competition rulings, where we need to allow that European companies can merge into European champions. Today, European authorities are more stringent and more difficult for European companies than for Chinese companies or American companies. There was no problem with the European Commission giving a merger, a green light for the merger of WhatsApp and Instagram with Facebook. Okay. There is no problem when a Chinese company wants to take over. It's a national authority who will say no when it is a Chinese company taking over one or other European company. But when it concerns two European companies working together, for example, Alstom and Siemens, to create a competitor against the Chinese in high-speed trains, the Commission said, no. That creates a too big market power in Europe. Nevertheless, 60% of the world market is in the hands of the Chinese today in fast trains. And then the answer of the Commission is, yeah, but that's in China. Yeah, that's in China now. But tomorrow that will be in Europe. Already Czechia, for example, has bought some equipment from Chinese companies in railways. When there is Scania and Volvo, the truck company who wanted to merge, the Commission said no. Why? Well, this new company will have a too big share of the market in the north. 2 minutes, yeah, thank you. In the north of Sweden, and the south of Finland. I liked Sweden and Finland, but the relevant market is the European market. And the relevant competition we have is in a world market. What we have to do with it. So our competition rules are outdated, and we need to use our competition rules in the right way. Let's break with our competition rules up those who have too much market power, whatever they come from. And let's not make it impossible for our companies to do it, because my point is that DSA and DMA and all this stuff is good, very well, but is mainly penalizing European startups. A big company in America can adopt themselves, can be compliant with that easily. They have plenty of people to do that. A small European player not. And that brings me finally, in my last 2 minutes, to the institutional changes we need. We will only do that if the European Union becomes a real union. I don't ask that Norway becomes member of the European Union. But if you become member of the European Union, I ask you to defend a few basic rules of federal ruling, what is necessary. We have no union. It's a patchwork of member states deciding by unanimity. That is still the European Union. Acting too little, too late. You need to end unanimity. You need to create a small executive. You need to have a budget with bonds, like the treasury bonds invented by Hamilton in the 18th century in the US. That is what you need in the world of tomorrow. You cannot allow yourself to, first of all, create a consensus with 27 before acting. That's not possible in the world, in the new age of empires. You need to act immediately if necessary. So, and that's, I promise, my last paragraph. Tomorrow, as has been remembered, Trump becomes, for the second time, President of the United States of America. That's maybe an enormous opportunity to do everything what we have talked about today. The first time when he became President of the US, we didn't do anything. We said that was necessary to do this, necessary to do that. maybe think about the defense autonomy and so on. But Biden was then elected, and we forgot everything, what we said before 2020, in one day. We went back to normality. Why discussing, again, reform in Europe? Well, maybe his re-election now can be the ultimate trigger for all this. Why? Because we can be sure that he will put tariffs on our economies. We can be sure that he shall financially blackmail NATO allies in the coming months and years. We can be sure that he will probably fast-track a number of deals with autocrats that he admires. Be it Xi, be it Putin. So my conclusion is that faster than we think, Europe will be on its own. And so to reinvent Europe as a global power, the fastest as possible, when Trump returns in the coming 4 years, will be paramount. Thank you. Thank you very much for your attention.
Her kommer del 2 av Øverland-foredraget 2025. Etter foredraget til Guy Verhofstadt hadde vi en paneldebatt. I tillegg til Verhofstadt selv bestod panelet av Heidi Nordby Lunde, leder i Europabevegelsen, Guri Melby, leder i Venstre, Kjetil Wiedswang, forfatter, journalist og kommentator i Dagens Næringsliv, Cathrine Thorleifsson, forsker og leder av Ekstremismekommisjonen. Samtaleleder var Marte Spurkland, redaktør i H-magasin.
Thank you so much, Mr. Verhofstadt, for this chilling insights into the poly crisis and how it may be met. I'm sure many of the audience here will have ideas for several seminars to invite you to, so you never have to go to Washington, D.C. the next few years. My name is Marte Spurkland. I'm going to be the moderator of this part 2 in this event. And with me on stage, as mentioned before, is Heidi Nordby Lunde, leader of the European movement in Norway and also a member of parliament for Høyre. Guri Melby, leader of the Liberal Party and also a member of the parliament. Kjetil Wiedswang, author and journalist, known from Dagens Næringsliv, also a former Europe correspondent. Cathrine Thorleifsson, researcher and anthropologist on the far-right movements at the Center of Research for Extremism in the University of Oslo. She also served as a chair of the Commission on Extremism. And of course, Mr. Verhofstadt. Heidi, I thought we might start with you. After listening to Mr. Verhofstadt and also Trond's appeal in the start of this event, and of course based on your own insights, do you agree that we are now at the point where we have to roll up our sleeves and do something, unless we will risk to lose some of the very basic values that we hold dear?
No, absolutely not. We're all good. But I've been listening to the murmuring in the audience where people are nodding and also agreeing with Mr. Verhofstadt's insights. And still half of you are against Norway joining the European Union. I'm pretty sure that in here, 70 or 50 or 70% of you are against Norway joining the European Union, and that Norway is best served standing alone in this world. Even after hearing all of the poly crisis that we are standing in the middle of. While the European Union, they are talking about expanding exactly because they want more countries being inside and working towards democracy and freedom. And as you also heard, the European movement did not start as a pro-EU movement. It was started in 1948 in the aftermath of the Second World War in order to preserve peace, in order to develop democracies. And after that, at least in Norway, the European movement has been working towards a membership in the European Union because we think it's not a perfect union, it will never be a perfect union, but because it's a pragmatic solution to the cooperation between free democratic nations in Europe. So this is why we say yes to the European Union. But it's not perfect, and I think you have delivered a very good insights in what needs to be improved. But in Norway today, the debate is that the European Union is failing, that Europe is failing. We are using competitiveness to China and the US. And I think we are blaming the EU for this instead of also looking at the different nations, that it's primarily regulations in the different nations. And I don't think we even understand the urgency when it comes to Ukraine winning the war against Russia, that this is an existential crisis for Europe, because if Russia should win, and God forbid they will, it shows that we are not capable of standing up for liberal democracies in Europe, and that they can start chewing into the European Union as well. The Baltic states knows this, Finland knows this, Sweden knows this. This is why they turned into NATO countries. While in Norway, we're in NATO, thank you very much, we're good.
Well, we are aiming to keep this not a yes or no, because we know which battlefield we're moving into then. But let's elaborate a bit on the European Defence Union that you envision, Mr. Verhofstadt. Guri, maybe is that something that you agree would be the right thing to do as quickly as possible right now?
Well, at least I think that the figures that he is showing are very revealing. And I think it's an important thing to remember that I think the easiest thing in the world, at least for Norway, is to increase our defense budgets. That's not difficult at all. But the difficult thing is to really get more security out of this. And in many ways, those figures should be sort of reassuring for us Europeans, because we know that on paper, we're actually, we have some resistance. And the problem is that we aren't able to gather forces. One thing I think that should worry Norway a lot is that if the EU and the countries within the EU actually succeed in doing some of the things that Guy is pointing to, actually being able to coordinate more, actually being able to build industry together. The problem for Norway staying outside will actually be a lot bigger than it is today, because you could almost say that because the EU aren't sort of fully integrated. You know, even when it comes to single market, even when it comes to defense, it makes it not so dangerous for Norway to be outside. But if the EU actually succeed in being more integrated, it would be more difficult than ever for Norway to stay outside. What worries me is that a lot of the issues that he has raised here today aren't really part of the Norwegian political debate. As Heidi says, we're sort of saying, oh, EU is not doing very well. We look at the numbers, we're saying that the US is sort of running away. And then the conclusion for a lot of people is that, well, this union is nothing for us, because this is the part of the world, this is the empire that is losing. But then my question is, what is the alternative? And especially now with Trump as the new American president, because maybe you could take, oh, we'll have sort of the Atlantic link. That is sort of our savior. Maybe Britain thought that during Brexit. I don't know if they think that now. So in this world, with these empires, I really don't see any other natural partners for Norway than Europe. And then I think it's a failure that we are not discussing these issues. And we always mention Sweden and Finland going into NATO after the war in Ukraine. But another important thing that happened was Denmark being more integrated into the EU's foreign policy and defense area. They concluded that NATO is not enough for us. So it's not enough for Denmark, it's enough for Norway? I don't think so.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that Norwegians tend to be skeptical towards the EU, or in large amount of us at least. And first of you talked about discontent. Norwegians are not the only ones being discontent about the leadership in Europe. And you also mentioned that we need some new kinds of leaders to take us in the right directions and to establish the ideology that is not there today. Kjetil, you've just written a book. what do you think is the main discontent with the leadership in the Central Europe, and how to counter it? Not just from Norway, but from the rest of Europe as well.
I think the basic explanation he gave, the driving force behind this discontent, is quite correct. Problem is what to do with it, because of course it's elitism in Europe, but say the climate question, it comes from top. It's the scientists say we have to do something about this, and even if you say to try to compensate to people that pay for it, it's not. Will not do it to just the rich stop driving fossil cars if everyone has to be with it, and that's quite difficult to sell. It will be sacrifices for all people to do it, and how to convince people to do that's a question for the politicians. You ask for ideologies, but the problem is that these ideologies, they are basically from the 19th century, and they don't fit into it. So how do you create that? That's the very, very big question.
The how to do it question, Cathrine, I know you're interested in that too, and you've been speaking in your research. You've done fieldwork in Europe and also experienced this discontent. Kjetil says the climate questions, of course. What other things are the really main discontents to tackle?
Well, as was also mentioned in the talk, it's multiple crises working together. We discussed both economy, demographic change, insecurity, uncertain futures. But these grievances are in turn translated online into ethno-racial fears. Some are real and some are perceived. And the people I've met across Europe, particularly in post-industrial world town, they do feel very alienated from elites in Brussels, London and Paris and so forth. But it's not only discontent, because it's also actually hope for the future. We tend to look at populists as having, there's no future, it's only nostalgia. But if you look at the politics of effect and the possibility of creating enthusiasm by mobilizing nostalgia for a secure past, and how that's used to re-anchor identities in a time that is perceived by many as very destabilized and uncertain. And we've been researching this for now 10 years and more even, and we all know the driving forces. We have books being published weekly on what drives support for the authoritarian, populist, radical right or far right, many words. But there are not that many books offering solutions, so I'm very hopeful about your book. But going back to your fourth point about creating new kind of infrastructure for internet, because we are living in digital democracies and digital empires, company-driven, state-ruled, or driven by rules and based order in Europe. And now we see a contestation not only over values and future, but also between, when Musk interviews Alice Weidel for the upcoming German election, it's a very strong pushback to the base rule of law in Europe, and also attempt at regulating the infrastructure for digital democracies. So I think the solution as well is not only internet course, but to foster resilience in citizens to disinformation. So we need also tools to navigate and experience and embody all that is awful, but still awful. And how this is also a topic we've been working with in the Commission, how to both foster resilience in ordinary citizens to dehumanization, to racism, to conspiratorial thinking, and technology that is exploited to destabilize and polarize populations in Europe.
A digital democracy, that has a nice ring to it. Heidi, Nordby, Lunde, is it possible?
Yes, absolutely, but I think we're starting in the wrong end, because we are always talking about the algorithms and we are blaming them, but instead of talking about the core problems. And I think you talked about the virtues of globalization, and we are the lucky ones. I think we in this room, we have all benefited from globalization, and globally as a whole, globalization is good for us. But it also comes with a cost. I think in the Western world and in the United States and in the UK, we've seen loss of jobs that has been outsourced to, for example, China. You have seen immigration And people do not feel that the politicians are delivering on the promise of giving you a better life than you had to begin with. And I think from the fall of the Berlin Wall, when I was 16, and I saw a world opening, and you saw a world where we were fighting racism, we were fighting for equality, you were fighting for women's rights, LGBTQ rights. You saw just a movement, everything was positive until like 10 years ago. So you say 2008, 2014, where we've seen democracies on decline. And I think if we are not addressing the core problems, which is a moderate political organization delivering on the promise of a better life, but are just blaming this on algorithms and big tech, then we are failing. We'll never repair anything. So I think this is a part of a bigger debate that is quintessential for us and our democracies. And I think we should stop just blaming big tech, because if there hadn't been any problems, they wouldn't be able to fuel anything out of it. So a wise man said, and I don't remember his name, he said that unsolved problems causes populism. And I think that's right. We need to start solving the real problems for real people.
Mm. Mr. Verhofstadt, do you recognize this line of thought that politicians, the power people in Europe, are too far away from the everyday problems, and that's fuel to populism that we haven't tackled well enough?
You cannot say that most politicians are too far away from the daily problems of people. That's not true. They do politics like they see people, they live in a local community, they are elected by a local community. I don't think that is the real problem. I think that the real problem in politics for the moment is that what I call centrist politics in general, because populism is also politics, but another way, that centrist politicians have given up to their main task, and that is giving direction to society and showing to people what direction society has to take. That they have given up. But politicians today are more or less people, pragmatists, and busy with, we need to do a little legislation there is a problem there, and the big picture is not longer there. And people maybe expect not only solutions from a politician, mainly they expect direction from a politician. Giving certainty in their life, giving hope in their life. I have not the impression that politicians are doing that today. It's true that you could say, populists create. First of all, they create anger and discontent, and then they say, we're going to solve it. But how are they going to solve it? That's not. So we're going to see how Trump is. What he's going to do is mainly trying to answer this discontent with putting barriers. Barriers for migrants, putting barriers for our goods and services. That will be the thing. And then in the meanwhile, lowering taxation inside for industry, so to create an economic effect inside. But it's mainly by defensive measures. A defense, a wall against people coming in and goods coming in from other parts. And towards that populism, I think that politicians have to try to reinvent liberal democracy. We need to reinvent liberal democracy. We are still working with the same instruments and elements as from the 18th and the beginning of the 19th centuries. We didn't change it. For example, I give the example of Switzerland. For 150 years, they do it in a way, but it's not a bad working society. I know they are colleagues of the Norwegians in the EFTA and so on, so I don't know your relationship with them. But it is a successful society. It is they manage also a number of deep problems with a system that is different from ours. So that's something that we can learn. From capitalism, the same. I didn't go into detail, but I think that we have a problem if capitalism leads to the monopolies in big tech as we have today, who represent half of the value of the wealth in a society. That's a problem, no? You have to face that. Is there one politician in Europe who is telling that? Can you name me one leading politician in Europe who is standing up and saying, we need to break the tech monopolies in Europe? And very simple, we're going to ask the European Commission to use competition rule number so to do it. At a certain moment, we thought, yeah, but the Americans will do it themselves. Yeah, there was with Biden, that was maybe a possibility, even when I doubted about that. What is their counterpart of the European Commission policy? That's the name, federal, I don't know what, on trade and the exactly name. They do nothing. It's their tech industry, so they will do nothing. Mm-hmm. And we don't have a tech industry. So there, a politician who stands up and say, you look, I have I want to break up the tech monopolies in Europe. Is there one who is doing it? On the right, on the left? On the right, no, certainly not. They think, well, it's a good, that's helping us for the moment. On the left, they are busy with the nationalization of the means of production still, so they are still in the 19th century.
but on the referenda, the type of democracy that they have in Switzerland, okay, they gave women the right to vote in 1970. And that was a consequence of that system. But isn't it a problem as well that, well, what do the voters do in Norway if, on the energy, that's quite a big question here. If you had referendums on that, they would be against hydropower, against windmills, but very for cheap electricity. And how do they afterwards solve that by the politicians?
Yeah. So the way questions are put forward in the Swiss referenda democracy is not that you can put whatever question. There is a whole procedure to make, and there are also referenda with multiple question. My point is also I'm not a big fan of referenda in the end, because I think it's very divisive. But there are other ways. There are other ways where you can say, for example, 20% of your income that you're paying, your tax that you're paying, you can allow yourself to the priorities that you choose. That exists there are experience on that in a few countries, but we have to roll new ways out. Why we are still thinking that people are not capable to take decisions in society, in politics, but you are capable to elect a politician. In my experience, it's far more difficult to find what is the right politician than to have an idea on a specific policy. Because you need to know the character of the politician, you need some perseverance, what he thinks, what he does. It's not easy, no? Normally it's not easy to find in a bunch of people and say, that's the right guy who's going to represent me. That people are allowed to do. But to say something, to make a decision, that's not allowed. And that in an age where with internet, in fact, technically there are not. In the French Revolution started and with a sentence that said that it was not only people could be represented, they could decide themselves. That was naturally not possible. That was possible in Athens. That was possible. It was a small community of a few thousands of people that could enter the agora and decide. That's not possible, but today it's again possible.
Cathrine, does this fill you with some hope or perspective that if the right leaders comes along and dare to do the tasks that Mr. Verhofstadt mentions here, to point the direction, do you think that the people on the ground will follow and elect the right people?
Maybe, but there's two things. First, I want to acknowledge also what Heidi said about addressing the root causes, whether they are the material conditions on the ground to have better futures. But what we're looking at is a very defining moment in European history, because it's a decade ago that Viktor Orban coins the term illiberal democracy. And we are seeing now an increased contestation of about values, direction and future. One is between defense for open liberal Europe, and the other is the opposite, is a rejection of European integration. It's the rebordering, bringing back borders, and it's a rejection of liberal values. I remember sitting in the Hungarian parliament and interviewing your big MP, and he said, liberalism is our enemy number one. And this has big appeal amongst Europeans. And that's why, how will we envision Europe 100 years from now? Has the liberal world order, has the democracies, will they be able to cooperate, Brazil, India, and come together? Or will the European project be also then a drop in history and, this massive nostalgia in certain constituencies towards, say, futures grounded in empire or Eurasia or traditionalism or conservatism, or in the rejection of fundamental human rights? So I think yes, I would like to be hopeful. I'm optimistic by nature, but it's currently, you see actually in terms of popular support for far partisan movements that are rejecting liberalism, are rejecting European integration and want to reform European Parliament from within.
Orbán started as a liberal, by the way, so I want to... Yeah, he started as a 100% pure liberal for 10 years. He lost the election and he said, I can only come back in power if I become nationalist. So it's pure opportunism. He has no... It's pure opportunism. And for that, he used the word illiberal democracy, but is in my opinion a little bit a contradictio in terminis, because you need at least a few liberal rights to have a real democracy. If there is no freedom of speech and not the liberty and freedom of press, it's difficult to talk about the democracy. But it's a pure opportunist. He has no he has found that out because he started as even as a friend of Soros. So
yes. First to Heidi Lunde and Guri Melby, you said in your lecture that as a politician you have to be a little bit populist. It's how, because that's what the electorate wants. And
that was autocriticism.
Yes. Yeah. And also we have to sell this other message about democratic values. So how do these two combine, and how do you meet that challenge as politicians?
Actually, I would like to see a political leader that said, I want to lose the next election. Because if you do that, you have the opportunity to actually do some big reforms that will be unpopular when you do them, but maybe have the right dimension to them afterwards. But you have to be willing to lose the next election. But I know this is a very intelligent audience, and the reason why I know this is because I see that Miss Jette Christensen is on the back row, and she wrote a book that I will recommend that says Democracy is Us. And when you talk about populism, it's very easy for us to think about populists that we don't like. But what is populism? Because what she writes in her book is that the Polish people didn't vote to lose their liberal rights. When they voted for an authoritarian government. They voted for higher pensions. Who here wants higher pensions? Yes, of course you do. Higher child benefits and lower petrol prices. Do you recognize this? We have political parties in Norway going for elections. This is populism. But it can also be a solution. It could be a right thing to do. But remember that people are not voting for authoritarian leaders because they want to lose their civil rights or human rights. They are voting for concrete measures that we think of as nice and kind and something that will actually benefit us, and thus also losing their liberal rights. So we need to also point out what populism also is, because it's not necessarily just selling bad ideas as something good. It's good ideas or good benefits that people support, but they forget what they stand a chance to lose.
But if it, assume that these institutions will survive this populist wave, say that it's strong enough to take that challenge, will not then this populism problem solve itself, because they give simplistic answers to complex questions? And they won't work. And when they try it, and it's shown to the people that it doesn't work, will not then people return to more civilized alternatives?
Well, that's a nice thought. It's just going to swing the other way. Can we be that hopeful, Guri Melby?
No, I think one thing that is that can sort of confirm what Kjetil is saying is that, remember, Trump didn't get re-elected. And most presidents in the United States get re-elected. He was very, very unpopular. Even though he had actually done a lot of those things that he said he was going to do, people saw that this didn't fix my problem. I didn't get my job back. The rich got richer, but I didn't get my job back. So that is sort of a hope in that, as you say, that we also see here in Norway that some parties, which I would describe as very populist, are now going a lot down after they get in power and see that they aren't able to fulfill what people thought they were going to fulfill. They aren't able to solve real people's problems. But I want to... Heidi had a good point, I think, when she said that we have to solve real problems and don't blame the tech giants. But I think also it is definitely a problem for our democracy when we see that amongst young people, most get their news through social media. They get their news through TikTok, Snapchat, Facebook. They don't go into the traditional media to read their news. They get it filtered through tech companies that, of course, their main task is to make money. And that's sort of legitimate. It's okay. We have said that. It's okay to have that as a task. But they don't have a task like we're going to get out multiple views on this issue or something. We just need something that gets the clicks up. And that is everything that is creating more conflict, more polarization. So I think that even though we can't blame the tech companies, we have to be much bolder when it comes to regulating them. And I think in Norway, we've had this big debate now for a couple of years of how damaging social media and screens are for children and for young people. But I haven't seen one effective anything that has actually been promoted by those in power trying to do something about this. The only thing is having an age limit. Well, I think everyone who has been young knows that it's very easy to get around an age limit. But actually trying to regulate what is allowed to do on these platforms, I see very little will to do that. And I think as Guy said in his lecture, this is one of the driving factors behind the populism. It's not the only one, but it's one of many factors. And if we don't have any will to regulate that, it will be very difficult to fight for the liberal democracy, I think.
Yes, we see how social media and new and emerging technologies are used in attacks on liberal democracies deliberately, but we can also see how the same technology can be used to foster resilience and be used for building good democracies. So that can include rehumanizing algorithms to foster more inclusive dialogue. It can be also, I met with gaming developers in Silicon Valley that are developing Holocaust memorial museums in Fortnite, for instance, using gaming, the largest industry in the world. Because we know that also gaming elements, if you look at the spectacular storming of Congress just a few years ago, how the role of digital subcultures played in that with the viral spread of the QAnon phenomenon globally, and how it radicalized both groups and individuals to partake in the violent storming of Congress. So these are presumably fringe elements, but they're defining part of internet culture and digital lives. And one thing is regulation, but I think also to understand better how one can foster better digital cities, countries and empires. And also more awareness amongst overall how our lives and desires are shaped by that technology.
How do you think about this? Is that one main place to start to make sure that these fringe elements in the outskirts of the digital world grow stronger and start to influence maybe the first movers, the younger generations on the social medias? Is that where we should also lay some effort right now?
I'm looking at Guy now.
What I want to say is that tech is really in the middle of it. So these big tech companies, it's about what they do with the social media. So what we are talking about, economically, the concentration of power, inequality, and then their political influence as an oligarchy, certainly in America, on because of the Supreme Court decision that money given by corporations is free speech. That's, in short, the thinking of the Supreme Court. So I think always that, I said that yesterday, that SCOTUS, so that's the abbreviation of the Supreme Court, is as a big problem as POTUS in America. But the reason why we have to, on big tech, is that it's in the center of three things, of social media, because they are fueling it, of economic power, and of political power. So it's real. Yeah, we have to talk about that. It's not so we have also big tech there no. It's the fundamental problem, not only of economic power, but also political power, and I would say of our personal behavior. Mm-hmm.
But I mean, we do the same mistakes over and over again. And of course, if you look at Norwegian media, if you're going to Dagsnytt 18 is one of the popular political debate areas. They are not inviting people who have a moderate voice in the political debate. They are inviting the one who are really polarizing the debate. So we are still fueling this. We are talking about social media, but we are doing this ourselves. And I can just tell you that the European movement, we are trying to scare the shit out of you with Trump because we want members. So Trump is being president in the United States. Wouldn't it be a great idea to work together with Europe at this stage and time in place and time? Of course, we are doing exactly the same thing. We're trying to scaremonger people into following our position, and this is we need to stop doing this. But of course, at the core of this kind of polarization, there are some core truths as well. Yes, with Trump as a president, Europe is more important for Norway, but should we try to polarize like this? So I'm not sure. So I'm trying to look at solution on how you can use and regulate tech companies, social media, trying to look for young people that has a voice in the political debate. But the people who has a voice in the political debate are not. They want to sell makeup. Yeah. So how do you engage them in policies and try to take down the rage baiting in order to make to have a better political debate? I think it's really difficult, and I don't have the answer to that.
And that's the really large question, because we all agree that we need to invigorate the ideology of democracy and human rights, but it's so difficult to sell. Kjetil, you asked, you wanted to say something.
Yeah.
You've been inside the media for so many years. Is it possible to bring these moderate democratic voices forward?
Oh, yeah, we are the very civilized moderate alternative in Norwegian press. But I wonder, you had one end of the spectrum is autocracy and then democracy at the other end. But isn't the EU something different? I mean, from Jean Monnet founded it all. Then when you read his biography, he thought that too much democracy at that point would be impossible, because the main idea was to rebuild Germany after the Second World War, and he thought that to convince French politicians to do that would be impossible. Therefore, he made this alternative with a very strong bureaucracy at the core of the system, and then they had to deliver and show the people that well, they create wealth, and then people will support European ID. And that's one of the successes of the system. It survived against all prediction by conservative British politicians and by people like that all the time. So just to regulate tech, it is quite powerful commission authority.
Yeah, I agree, but it's not sufficient to have your own industry. So that's my point. It's good that you do that. I'm not against the DSA, DMA, and all this stuff. I voted for that, so in Parliament concretely. But it's not enough to create your own industry, and we need to create our industry. And therefore, you need to go further. That what the law wanted to do, that's to really create a single market on all these issues we are talking about. And we don't have that for.
Yeah, but even in defense, that's, as I say, you have got all those different systems. But quite a lot of manufacture of these are national, often national champions, often with strong unions. And so if you say we'll compete or some new weapon system, in Norway we have got two big manufacturers of weapons. So even if Kongsberg get a fantastic contract with Europe, it would be wailing in Raufoss on the other side if they have to close down because they didn't win that competition. And isn't it like that in all the European countries with that great support of the different manufacturers of weapons? And isn't that the main problem?
They are almost all small companies compared to the American companies. So if 80% of the of what we spent is outside Europe, we have to try to make a common tank in Europe or a common fighter in Europe. The only successful example of real European cooperation is Airbus. Let's be honest. Airbus is a success. It's beating Boeing. Okay. So the same could be done in other fields, I think. But by the way, Airbus was an initiative of a British company. So, but okay, that's a detail. So.
Guri, Melby, we have 5 minutes left of this discussion. Let's try to round it up, trying to point out the direction that we need to take ourselves, all us in the room and the society in. Back to the big questions, how to do it. Are you going to scaremonger like...
Well, they can try that tactic. I would like to try something else. But just a quick comment when it comes to the defense industry. I think that even though you have much better collaboration within Europe, it doesn't mean that all of the national different industry has to die, because I think one of the main things that Kongsberg does is to produce parts of things that puts onto other producents, like on the F-35 or something. So it doesn't mean that you have to close down your own factories. It just means that you're part of a bigger conglomerate, and I think that will be a very good idea. I think that first and foremost, I think that it's important that we actually debate some of these issues that Guy has raised for us today, because my big concern is that they're not very much a part of the Norwegian debate today. Of course, everyone in Norway has an opinion. Are you for or are you against more European integration? That's sort of the easy question. But there are lots of other questions surrounding that question that we don't discuss. One of the things that we don't discuss at all, almost, in Parliament or anywhere else, is what to do with China. Should we have a de-risking strategy, the same strategy as the EU? Should we go for the more radical strategy as the Americans do? There are arguments for both of them. I think the big problem now is that Norway doesn't have a strategy, and we're not discussing what kind of strategy we want. We're sort of just playing like duck and cover. And that, I think, is the most dangerous thing, because that means that not only the politicians don't know what direction we're going, the people don't know, the businesses, they have no idea. Should we really go for China, go for that market, or should we sort of back away? They have no idea. They're not getting any clear signals from the Norwegian authorities. So I think that we actually need to sit down and discuss a lot of these themes. And I don't want to sort of claim that I have the answer to all of these issues, but we're not discussing them. And I think that is really dangerous, because I'm also a bit skeptical towards more direct democracy, but I'm not skeptical towards more involvement in democracy. And the only way to involve people is to actually talk about the things that are difficult. And I feel that we use a lot of time talking about things that, of course, are difficult, but they're not the sort of the main issues. We have a lot of debates. You talked about Dagsnytt 18. I think there was a debate on Friday whether the songs sung in church is in a too low or too high tone.
Yeah.
It was a real debate.
I heard it, yeah.
And it may be feeling very important for those people not being able to reach that high note, but it's not sort of the main issues that we need to solve in this society. So I think, well, people, of course, there are many populist politicians that get a lot of votes and that are very popular, but I think also many people want competent politicians who not always giving you the answer, but actually sort of dare to describe what is difficult today. So at least that's what I'm going for.
I think there's something lovely in a country where you can actually discuss whether you hit the high or low notes. Because if in a society, if people are fearing for their lives, this will not be a debate.
But I thought now we're actually out of subjects to discuss now. I thought.
But I think what has happened is that both globalization, I think the European Union and the European cooperation, and democracy itself has been a victim of their success. And my life, from I was 16, I saw the fall of the Berlin Wall. I'm taking our life and our rights for granted. We forgot to stand up for our way of living, and now everything is going against it. Because when we sat down and we were complacent, the forces against us, they never stopped working. But now we see them so clearly. So if it's a time in our time for us to stand up, this is it. And I think we're talking about the pendulum. It always swings like this. But we are talking now about the scare of the right-wing authoritarian and populists. Remember that some of this also stems out of that we have been in a time where we have had authoritarian left-wing populists as well. I mean, through woke and some of the climate change activists as well, has felt for some parts of the population as very authoritarian. And yet now you have a counter measures against that. And our job, I think, is to be the resistance. I talked about this yesterday at the dinner that we put in, that we are the resistance, and we are working towards a more liberal world and taking all the benefits that we did get out of globalization, but repairing some of the things that were not good, that people felt that they were losing the jobs, inequality was rising. We have to repair some of the things that we lost on the way, but we have to keep our values and stand up for them.
Thank you all for being the resistance and standing up and trying to fill the void. Thank you for being here. On the way out, do stop by the book stand outside. You can buy Kjetil Wiedswang's latest books and also other books that build democratic resilience. Thank you so much.